Internal Auditors. Global internal audit standards guide the worldwide professional practice of internal auditing and serve as a basis for evaluating and elevating the quality of the internal audit function. At the heart of the standards are 15 guiding principles that enable effective internal auditing. Each principle is supported by standards that contain requirements, considerations for implementation, and examples of evidence of conformance. Together, these elements help internal auditors achieve the principles and fulfill the purpose of internal auditing. Internal auditing and the public interest. Public interest encompasses the social and economic interests and overall well-being of a society and the organizations operating within that society, including those of employers, employees, investors, the business and financial community, clients, customers, regulators, and government. Questions of public interest are context-specific and should weigh ethics, fairness, cultural norms and values, and potential disparate impacts on certain individuals and subgroups of society. Internal auditing plays an organization's ability to serve the public interest. While the primary function of internal auditing is to strengthen governance, risk management, and control processes, its effects extend beyond the organization. Internal auditing contributes to an organization's overall stability and sustainability by providing assurance on its operational efficiency, reliability of reporting, compliance with laws and/or regulations, safeguarding of assets, and ethical culture. This, in turn, fosters public trust and confidence in the organization and the broader systems of which it is a part. The IA is committed to setting standards with input from the public and to benefit the public. The Standards Board is responsible for establishing and maintaining the standards in the interest of the public. This is achieved through an extensive, ongoing due process overseen by an independent body, the IPPF Oversight Council. The process includes soliciting input from and considering the interests of various stakeholders, including internal audit practitioners, industry experts, government bodies, regulatory agencies, public representatives, others, so that the standards reflect the diverse needs and priorities of society. Applicability and elements of the internal audit standards set forth principles, requirements, considerations, and examples for the profession of internal auditing globally. The standards apply to any individual or function that provides internal audit services, whether an organization employs internal auditors directly, contracts them through an external service provider, or both. Organizations receiving internal audit services and industry affiliation, purpose, size, complexity, and structure.
The standards apply to the internal audit function and individual internal auditors, including the chief auditor, while the chief audit executive is accountable for the internal audit function's implementation of in conformance with all principles and standards. Auditors are responsible for conforming with the principles and standards relevant to performing their job responsibilities, which are presented primarily in Domain 2, Ethics and Professionalism, and Domain 5, Performing Internal Audit Services. The standards are organized into 5 domains. Domain I, Purpose of Internal Auditing. Domain 2, Ethics and Professionalism. Domain 3, governing the internal audit function. Domain 4, managing the internal audit function. Domain V, performing internal audit services. Domains through V contain the following elements: principles, odd descriptions of a related group of requirements and considerations, standards, which include requirements, mandatory practices for internal auditing, considerations for implementation, common and preferred practices to consider when implementing the requirements, examples of evidence of conformance, ways to demonstrate that the requirements of the standards have been implemented. The standards use the word must in the requirements sections and the words should and may to specify common and preferred practices in the considerations for implementation sections. Each standard ends with a list of examples of evidence. The examples are neither requirements nor the only ways to demonstrate conformance. Rather, they are provided to help internal audit functions prepare for quality assessments, which rely on demonstrative evidence, demonstrating conformance with the standards, the requirements, considerations for implementation, and examples of evidence of conformance are designed to help internal auditors conform with the standards. While conformance with the requirements is expected, internal auditors occasionally may be unable to conform with the requirement yet still achieve the intent of the standard. Circumstances that may necessitate adjustments are often related to resource limitations or specific aspects of a sector, industry, and/or jurisdiction. In these exceptional circumstances, alternative actions should be implemented to meet the intent of the related standard. The Chief Audit Executive is responsible for documenting and conveying the rationale for the deviation in the adopted alternative actions to the appropriate parties. Requirement and information appear in standard with Global Internal Audit Standards in Domain 3, governing the internal audit function together with its principles and standards. While the circumstances necessitating adjustments are too varied to list, the following section acknowledges two areas that consistently draw questions: small internal audit functions and those in the public sector.
Application and small internal audit functions. The internal audit function's ability to conform with the standards may be affected by its size or the size of the organization. With limited resources, completing certain tasks may be challenging. Additionally, if the internal audit function comprises only one member, an adequate quality assurance and improvement program will require assistance from outside the internal audit function. Application in the public sector. While the global internal audit standards apply to all internal audit functions, internal auditors in the public sector work in a political environment under governance, organizational, and funding structures that may differ from those of the private sector. The nature of these structures and related conditions may be affected by the jurisdiction and level of government in which the internal audit function operates. Additionally, some terminology used sector differs from that of private sector. These differences may affect how internal audit functors apply the standards. The section applying the global internal audit standards in the public sector, which follows Domain V, performing internal audit services, describes strategies for conformance amidst and conditions unique to internal auditing in the public sector.
Domain I, purpose of internal auditing. The purpose statement is intended to assist internal auditors and internal audit stakeholders in understanding and are the value of internal audit. Internal auditing strengthens the organization's ability to create, protect, and sustain value by providing the board and management with independent, risk-based, and objective assurance, advice, insight, and foresight. Internal auditing enhances the organization's successful achievement of its objectives, governance, risk management, and control processes, decision-making and oversight, reputation and credibility with its stakeholders, ability to serve the public interest. Internal auditing is performed by competent professionals in conformance with the global internal audit standards, which are set in the public interest. The internal audit function is independently positioned with direct accountability to the board. Internal auditors are free from undue influence and committed to making objective assessments. Domain 2, ethics and professionalism. The principles and standards in the ethics and professionalism domain of the global internal audit standards replace the IAS former code of ethics and outline the behavioral expectations for professional including audit executives of individuals and any entities that provide internal audit services. Conformance with these principles and standards instills trust in the profession of internal auditing, creates an ethical culture within the internal audit function, and provides the basis for reliance on internal auditors' work and judgment. All internal auditors are required to conform with the standards of ethics and professionalism. If internal auditors are codes of ethics, behavior, or conduct, such as those of an organization, conformance with the principles and standards of ethics and professionalism contained herein is still expected. The fact that a particular behavior is not meant does not preclude it from being considered unacceptable or discreditable. While internal auditors are responsible for their own conformance, the Chief Audit Executive is expected to support and promote conformance with the principles and standards in the ethics and professionalism domain by providing opportunities for training and guidance. The Chief Audit Executive may choose to delegate certain responsibilities for managing conformance but retains accountability for the ethics and professionalism of the internal audit function.
Integrity. Internal auditors demonstrate integrity in their work and behavior. Integrity is behavior characterized by adherence to moral and ethical principles, including demonstrating honesty and the courage to act based on relevant facts, even when facing pressure to do otherwise, or when doing so might create potential adverse personal or organizational consequences. In simple terms, internal auditors are expected to tell the truth and do the right thing, even when it is uncomfortable or difficult. Integrity is the foundation of the other principles of ethics and professionalism, including objectivity, competency, due professional care, and confidentiality. The integrity of internal auditors is essential to establishing trust and earning respect. Principle to maintain objectivity. Internal auditors maintain an impartial and unbiased attitude when performing internal audit services and making decisions. Objectivity is an unbiased mental attitude that allows internal auditors to make professional judgments, fulfill their responsibilities, and achieve the purpose of internal auditing without compromise. An independently positioned internal auditor's ability to maintain objectivity. Principle 3. Demonstrate competency. Internal auditors apply the knowledge, skills, and abilities to fulfill their roles and responsibilities successfully. Demonstrating competency requires developing and applying the knowledge, skills, and abilities to provide internal audit services. Because internal auditors provide a diverse array of services, the competencies needed by each internal auditor vary. In addition to possessing or obtaining the competencies needed to perform services, internal auditors in pursuing professional development. Principle for exercise due professional care. Internal auditors apply due professional care in planning and performing internal audit services. The standards that embody exercising due professional care require conformance with the global internal audit standards, consideration of the nature, circumstances, and requirements of the work to be performed, application of professional skepticism to critically assess and evaluate information. Due professional care requires planning and performing internal audit services with the diligence, judgment, and skepticism possessed by prudent and competent internal auditors. When exercising due professionals perform in the best interest of those receiving internal audit services but are not expected to be infallible.
Principle 5. Maintain confidentiality. Internal auditors use and protect information appropriately. Because internal auditors have unrestricted access to the data, records, and other information necessary to fulfill the internal audit mandate, they often receive information that is confidential, proprietary, and/or personally identifiable. This includes information in physical and digital form as well as information derived from oral communication, such as formal or informal meeting discussions. Internal auditors must respect the value and ownership of information they receive by using professional purposes and protecting it from unauthorized access or disclosure internally. Domain 3. Governing the internal audit function, appropriate governance arrangements are essential to enable the internal audit function to be effective. This domain outlines the requirements for chief audit executives to work closely with the board to establish the internal audit function independently and oversee its performance. This domain also outlines senior management's responsibilities that support the board's responsibilities and promote strong governance of the internal audit function. While the chief audit executive is responsible for the requirements in this domain, activities of the board and senior management are essential to the internal audit function's ability to fulfill the purpose of internal auditing. These activities are identified as essential conditions in each standard and establish a necessary foundation for an effective dialogue between the board, senior management, and the chief audit executive, ultimately into internal audit function. Principle 6, authorized by the board establishes, approves, and supports the mandate of the internal audit function. The internal audit function receives its mandate from the board or applicable law in certain public sector environments. The mandate specifies the authority, role, and responsibilities of the internal audit function and is documented in the Internal Audit Charter. The mandate empowers the internal audit function to provide the board and senior management with objective assurance, advice, insight, and foresight. The internal audit function carries a systematic, disciplined approach to evaluating and improving the effectiveness of governance, risk management, and control processes throughout the organization. Principle 7, positioned independently, the board establishes and protects the internal audit function's independence and qualifications. The board is responsible for enabling the independence of the internal audit function. Independence is defined as the freedom from conditions, ability to carry out its responsibilities in an unbiased manner.
Audit function is only able to fulfill the to the board, is qualified, and is positioned at a level within the organization that enables the internal audit function to discharge its services and responsibilities without interference. Principle 8, overseen by the board oversees the internal audit function to ensure the function's effectiveness. Board oversight to enable the overall effectiveness of the internal Achieving this principle requires collaborative and interactive communication between the board and the chief audit executive, as well as the board's support in ensuring the internal audit function, the internal audit mandate. Additionally, the board receives assurance about the quality of the performance of the chief audit executive and the internal audit function through the Quality Assessment and Improvement Program, including the board's direct review of the results of the external quality assessment. Principle 9, plan strategically. The chief audit executive plans strategically to position the internal audit function to fulfill its mandate and achieve long-term success. Planning strategically requires the chief audit audit mandate and the organization's governance, risk management, and control processes. A properly resourced and positioned internal audit function develops and implements a strategy to support the organization's success. In addition, the chief audit executive creates and implements methodologies to guide the internal audit function and develop the internal audit plan. Principle 10. Manage resources. The Chief Audit Executive manages resources to implement the internal audit function strategy and achieve its plan and mandate. Managing resources requires obtaining and deploying financial, human, and technological resources effectively. The Chief Audit Executive needs to obtain the resources required to perform internal audit responsibilities and deploy the resources according to the methodologies established for the internal and communicate effectively. The Chief Audit Executive guides the internal audit function to communicate effectively with its stakeholders. Effective communication requires building relationships, establishing trust, and enabling stakeholders to benefit from the results of internal audit services. The Chief Audit Executive is responsible for helping the internal audit function establish ongoing Additionally, the Chief Audit Executive oversees the internal audit function's formal communications with the board and senior management to enable quality and provide insights based on the results of internal audit services.
Principle 12. Enhance quality. The Chief Audit Executive is responsible for the internal audit function's conformance with the global internal audit standards and continuous performance improvement. Quality is a combined measure of conformance with the global internal audit standards and the achievement of the internal audit function's performance objectives. Therefore, a quality assurance and improvement program is designed to internal audit functions conformance with the standards, achievement of performance objectives, and pursuit of continuous improvement. The internal and external assessments. The Chief Audit Executive is responsible for ensuring that the internal audit function is continuously seeking improvement, developing measures to assess the performance of internal audit engagements, internal auditors, and the internal audit function. These measures form the basis for evaluating progress toward performance objectives, including continuous improvement. Auditors plan each engagement using a systematic, disciplined approach. The global internal audit standards, along with the methodologies established by the Chief Audit Executive, form the foundation of internal auditors' systematic, disciplined approach to planning engagements. Are responsible for effectively communicating at all stages of the engagement. Engagement planning starts with understanding the initial expectation and the reason the engagement was included in the internal audit plan. When planning engagements, internal auditors gather the information that enables them to understand the organization and the activity under review. Relevant to the activity. Risk assessment allows internal auditors to identify and prioritize the risks to determine the engagement objectives and scope. Internal auditors also identify the criteria and resources needed to perform the engagement and develop an engagement work program, which describes the specific engagement steps to be performed. Principle 14 Conduct engagement work. Internal auditors implement a program to achieve the engagement objectives. To implement the engagement work program, internal auditors gather information and perform analyze and evaluations to produce evidence. These steps enable internal audit to provide assurance and identify potential findings, determine the causes, effects, and significance, develop recommendations and/or collaborate with management plans. Develop conclusions. Principle 15 Communicate engagement results and monitor action plans. Internal auditors communicate the engagement results to the and monitor management's progress toward the implementation of recommendations or action. The Institute of Internal Auditors' global internal audit standards guide the worldwide professional practice of internal auditing and serve as a basis for evaluating and elevating the quality of the internal audit function. At the heart of the standards are 15 guiding principles that enable effective internal auditing. Each principle is supported by requirements, considerations for implementation, and examples of evidence of conformance. Together, these elements help internal auditors achieve the principles and fulfill the purpose of internal auditing. Internal auditing and the public interest. Public interest encompasses the social and economic interests and overall well-being of a society and the organizations operating within that society, including those of employers, employees, investors, and financial community, clients, customers, regulators, and government. Of public interest are context-specific, fairness, cultural norms and values, and potential disparate impacts on certain individuals and subgroups of society. Internal auditing plays a critical role in enhancing an organization's ability to serve the public interest. While the primary function of internal auditing is to strengthen and control processes, its effects extend beyond the organization. Internal auditing contributes to an organization's overall stability and sustainability by providing assurance on its operational efficiency, reliability of reporting, compliance with laws and/or regulations, safeguarding of assets, and ethical culture. This, in turn, fosters public trust and confidence in the organization and the broader system. The IA is committed to setting standards with input from the public and to benefit the public. The International Internal Audit Standards Board is responsible for establishing and maintaining the standards in the interest of the public. This is achieved through an extensive, ongoing due process overseen by an independent body, the IPPF Oversight Council. The process includes soliciting input from the interests of various stakeholders, including internal audit practitioners, industry experts, government regulatory agencies, public representatives, and others, so that the standards reflect the diverse needs and priorities of society. Applicability and elements of the standards. The global standards set forth principles, requirements, considerations, and examples for the professional practice of internal auditing globally. The standards apply to any individual or function that provides internal audit services, whether an organization employs internal auditors directly, contracts them through an external service provider, or both. Services vary in sector and industry affiliation, purpose, size, complexity, the Institute of Internal Auditors Global Internal Audit Standards guide the worldwide professional practice of internal auditing and serve as a basis for evaluating and quality of the internal audit function. At the heart of the standards are 15 guiding principles that enable effective internal auditing. Each principle is supported by standards that contain requirements, considerations for implementation, and examples of evidence of performance. Together, these help internal auditors achieve the principles and fulfill the purpose of internal auditing. Internal auditing in the public interest encompasses the social and economic interest and overall well-being of society and organizations operating within that society, including those of employers, employees, investors, and financial community, clans, customers, regulators, and government. Questions of public interest are context-specific and should weigh ethics, fairness, cultural norms and values, potential disparate impacts on certain individuals and subgroups of society. Internal auditing plays a critical role enhancing an organization's ability to serve the public. While the primary function of internal auditing is to strengthen governance, risk management, and control processes, its effects extend beyond the internal auditing contribute to the organization's overall stability and sustainability by providing assurance on its operational efficiency, of reporting, compliance with laws and or regulations, safeguarding of assets, and culture. This, in turn, fosters public trust and confidence in the organization and the programs of which it is a part. The committed to setting standards with input from the public and to benefit the public. International Internal Audit Standards Board is responsible for establishing and maintaining the standard in the interest of. This is achieved through an extensive and ongoing due process overseen by an independent body, the IPPF Oversight Council. The process includes soliciting input from and considering the interests of various stakeholders, including internal audit practitioners, industry experts, government bodies, regulatory agencies, public and others, so that this reflect the diverse needs and priorities, applicability, and elements of the standards. The global internal audit standards set forth requirements, consideration, and examples for the professional practice internal auditing globally. The standard apply to any individual or function that services, whether an organization employs internal auditors directly through an external service provider or both. Organizations receiving internal audits and industry affiliation, size, complexity, and structure.
The standards of the internal audit function in individual internal auditors, including the Chief Audit Executive. The Chief Audit Executive is accountable for audit functions implementation in conformance with all principles and standards. All internal auditors are responsible for conforming with this and standards relevant to performing their job responsibilities, which are presented primarily in ethics and professionalism. In Domain 5, perform internal audit services. The standards are organized into 5 domains. Domain I, purpose of internal auditing. Domain 2, Domain 3, governing the audit function. Domain 4, managing the audit function. Domain B, performing internal services. Domains of 3 contain the false principles, odd description for related requirements and considerations. Standards, which include mandatory practices for internal auditing, regulations for implementation, common and preferred practices to consider when implementing the requirements. Examples of evidence of conformance, ways to demonstrate the requirements of the standards have been implemented. The standards use the word must requirements sections, and the words should be made to specify common and preferred practices in the considerations for implementation sections. Each standard ends with a list of examples of evidence. Rules are neither requirements nor the only documents, rather, provided to help internal audit functions prepare for quality assessments, which rely on demonstrative evidence. Demonstrate conformance with standards. The requirements consist for implementation, and examples of evidence documents are designed to help internal auditors conform standards. Performance requirements is expected. Internal auditors occasionally may be enabled to conform with the requirement yet still achieve it. Adjustments are often related to resource limitations or specific aspects of a sector, industry, or jurisdiction. In these circumstances, alternatives should be implemented to meet the intent of the related standard. The Chief Audit Executive is responsible for documenting and conveying the rationale for deviation alternative actions to the appropriate parties. Related requirement and information here on standard for point conformance with global internal audit standards in Domain 3, governing the internal audit function. together with its principles, while the senses necessitating adjustments are too varied to list. The following section acknowledges two areas that consistently draw questions: small internal audit function, public sector.
Application small internal audit functions. The internal function's ability to fully conform is affected by its size or the size of the organization. With limited completing certain tasks may be challenging. Additionally, if the internal audit function comprises only one member, an quality assurance and improvement program assistance from outside the internal audit application in the public sector. While the global standards apply to internal audit functions, internal auditors in the public sector work in a environment under governance, organization, funding structures that may differ from private sector. The nature of these structures and related conditions may be affected by the jurisdiction and level of government in which the internal audit function operates. Additionally, some terminology used in the public sector differs from the private sector. These differences may affect how internal audit functions in the public sector apply the standards. The section applying the global internal audit standards in the public sector, which falls between the performing internal audit services, strategies for conformance amid the circumstances and conditions unique to auditing in the public sector.
Domain of internal auditing. The purpose statement is intended internal audit stakeholders in understanding and articulating the value of internal auditing. Internal auditing strengthens the organization's ability to create, protect, and sustain value by providing the board and management with independent, risk-based, objective assurance, advice, insight, and foresight. Auditing enhances the organization's successful achievement of its objectives. Governance, risk management, and control process, decision-making and oversight, reputation and credibility. With its stakeholders, abilities to public interest. Internal auditing is most effectively performed by competent professionals in conformance with the global internal audit standard, which are set in the public interest. The internal audit function is in a position with direct accountability to the board. Internal auditors are free from influence and committed to make objective assessments. Domain 2: Ethics, professionalism, and standards in the ethics and professionalism domain of the global internal standards replace the former code of ethics and outline behavioral expectations for professional internal auditors, including chief audit executives or individuals and any entities that provide internal audit services. Conformance with these principles and standards instilled in the profession of internal auditing creates an ethical culture within the internal audit function and provides the basis for reliance on internal audit and judgment. All internal auditor required conform with the standards of ethics and profession. If internal auditors are expected to codes of ethics, behavior, or conduct, such as those of an organization, conformance with the principles and standards of professionalism contained herein is still expected. The fact that a particular behavior is not met by these principles and standards does not preclude it from being considered unethical or discreditable. While internal auditors are responsible for their own conformance, the chief audit executive is expected to support and promote conformance principles and standards in the ethics and professionalism domain by providing opportunities for training and guidance. executive may choose to delegate certain responsibilities for managing conformance, but with accountability for the ethics and professionalism of the internal audit function.
Integrity. Internal auditors demonstrate work and behavior. Integrity is characterized by adherence to moral and ethical principles, including demonstrating honesty and the courage to act based on relevant facts, even when facing pressure to rise, or when doing so might create potential adverse personal or organizational consequences. In simple terms, internal auditors are expected to tell the truth and do the right thing, even when it's comfortable or difficult. Integrity is the foundation of the other principles of ethics and professional, including objectivity, competency, due professional care, and confidentiality. The of internal auditors is essential to establish and earning respect. Principle: maintain objectivity. Internal auditors maintain an unbiased attitude when performing internal audit services and missions. Objectivity: unbiased mental attitude that allows internal auditors judgments, fulfill their responsibilities, and achieve the purpose of internal audit without compromise. An independently positioned internal audit function supports internal to maintain objectivity. Principle: 3. Demonstrate competency. Internal auditors apply the knowledge, skills, fill the roles and responsibilities successfully. Demonstrating competency, developing and applying the knowledge, skills, and abilities to provide internal offices. Because internal auditors provide a diversity of services, the competencies needed by each internal area. In addition to possessing attaining the competencies needed to perform services, internal auditors improve the effectiveness and quality of services by pursuing professional development. Principle: exercise due professional care. Internal auditors apply due professional care in planning and performing internal audit services. The standards that embody exercising due care require conformance with a global internal audit standard, duration of the nature, circumstances, requirements of the work to be performed, application of professional skepticism to critically assess and evaluate information. Do professional care requires planning and performing internal audit services with a diligence, judgment, and skepticism possessed by prudent and competent internal auditors. When exercising due professional care, internal auditors perform in the interests of those receiving internal audit services, but are not expected to be infallible.
Principle 5. Maintain confidentiality. Internal auditors protect information appropriately because auditors have unrestricted access to data, records, and other information necessary to fulfill the internal audit mandate. They receive information confidential, proprietary, and or personally identifiable. This includes information in physical and digital form, as well as information from oral communications, such as formal or informal meeting discussions. Internal auditors must respect the value and information they receive by using it only for professional purposes and protecting it from unauthorized access or disclosure internally and externally. 3. Governing the internal audit. Appropriate governance arrangements are essential to enable the internal audit function to be effective. This domain outlines the requirements for chief audit executives to work closely with the board to establish the internal audit function, position independently, and oversee performance. This outlines senior management responsibilities that support the board's responsibilities and promote strong governance of the internal audit function. While the chief audit executive is responsible for requirements in this domain, activities of the board and senior management are essential to the internal audit function's ability to fulfill the purpose of internal auditing. These activities are identified as essential conditions in each standard and establish a necessary foundation for an effective dialogue between the board, senior management, and the chief audit executive, ultimately enabling an effective internal audit function. Principle 6, authorized by the board. The board establishes, approves, and supports the mandate of the internal audit function. The internal audit function receives its mandate from the board or in public sector environments. The mandate specifies the authority, role, and responsibilities of the internal audit function and documented in the internal audit charter. The mandate empowers the internal audit function to provide the board and senior management with effective assurance, advice, insight, and foresight. The internal audit function carries out the mandate by bringing a systematic approach to evaluating and improve the effectiveness of governance, risk management, and control processes throughout the organization. Principle 7, positioned independently. The board establishes and protects the internal audit function's independence and qualification. The board is responsible for enabling the independence of the internal function. Independence is defined as from conditions that impair the internal audit function's ability to carry out its responsibilities in an unbiased manner.
The internal audit function is only to fulfill the purpose of internal auditing when the chief audit executive reports directly to the board, is qualified, positioned at a level with organization that enables the internal audit function to discharge its service and responsibilities without interference. Principle 8, overseen by the board. The board oversees the internal audit function to ensure the function's effectiveness. Board oversight is essential to enable the overall effectiveness of the internal audit function. Principle requires collaborative and intercommunication between the board and chief audit executive as well as the board, ensuring the internal audit function has resources to fulfill the internal audit mandate. Additionally, the board receives assurance about the quality of the performance chief audit executive and internal audit function and improvement program, including the direct review of results of the external quality assessment. Principle 9, plan strategically. The chief audit executive plans strategically to position the internal to fulfill its mandate and achieve long-term success. Planning strategically requires the chief audit executive to understand the internal audit mandate and the organization's governance, risk management, and control processes. A resource and position internal audit function develops an strategy to support the organization's success. The chief audit executive implements methodologies to guide the internal audit function and develop the internal audit plan. Principle 10, manage risk. As the chief audit executive manages resources, implement the internal audit function strategy, plan, and mandate. Managing resources requires obtaining and deploying financial, human, and technological resources effectively. The chief audit executive needs to resources required to perform internal audit responsibilities and deploy the resources according to the methodologies established for the internal audit function. Principle 11, communicate effectively. The chief audit executive guides the internal audit to communicate effectively with its stakeholders. Effective communication requires building, establishing trust, and enabling stakeholders to benefit from the results of internal audit services. The chief responsible for helping the internal audit function establish ongoing communication with stakeholders to build and foster relationships. Additionally, the Chief Audit Executive oversees the internal audit function's formal communications with the board and senior management to enable quality and provide insights based on the results of internal audit services.
Principle 12. Enhance quality. The Chief Audit Executive is responsible for the internal audit function's conformance with the global internal audit standards performance improvement. Quality is a combined measure of conformance with the global internal audit standards and the achievement of internal audit functions performance objectives. Therefore, a quality assurance and improvement program is designed to evaluate internal audit functions conformance with the standards, achievement of performance of continuous improvement. The program includes internal and external assessments. The Chief Audit Executive is responsible that the internal is continuous. This requires developing measures assess the performance of internal audit engagements, internal auditors, and the internal audit function. These form the basis for evaluating performance, including continuous improvement. 13. Engagements effectively. Internal auditors plan engagement using a systematic, disciplined approach. The global internal audit standards, along with methodologies established by the Chief Audit Executive, form the foundation for internal auditor systematic, disciplined approach to planning engagements. Internal auditors are responsible for effectively communicating at all stages of the engagement. Engagement planning starts with understanding initial expectations for the engagement and the reason the engagement was included in the internal audit plan. When planning engagements, internal auditors gather the information that enables them to understand the organization and the activity under review and to assess the risks relevant to the activity. The engagement risk assessment allows internal auditors to identify and prioritize the risks to determine the engagement objective and scope. Internal auditors also identify the criteria and resources needed to perform engagement and develop an engagement work program, which describes engagement steps to be performed. Principle 14. Conduct engagement work. Internal auditors implement the engagement work program to achieve the engagement objectives. To implement the engagement work program, internal auditors gather information and perform analysis and evaluations to produce evidence. These steps enable internal auditors to provide assurance and identify and determine the causes, effect, and significance of the findings, develop recommendations, and or collaborate with management to develop action plans. Develop vision. Principle 15. Communicate engagement results and monitor action plans. Internal auditors communicate engagement results to the appropriate parties and monitor management's progress toward implementation of recommendations and action plans. The Institute of Internal Auditors Global Internal Audit Standards guide the worldwide professional practice of auditing and serve as a base for evaluating and elevating the quality of the function. At the heart of the standards are guiding principles that enable effective internal auditing. Each principle is supported by standards that contain requirements, operations for implementation, and examples of evidence of conformance. Together, these elements help internal auditors achieve and fulfill the purpose of internal auditing. Internal auditing and the public interest encompasses the social and economic interests and overall well-being of a society. Organizations operating within that society of employers, employees, investors, and financial community, clients, customers, regulators, and government. Questions of public interest are context-specific and should weigh ethics, fairness, cultural values, and potential disparate impacts on certain individuals and subgroups of society. Internal auditing plays a critical role in enhancing an organization's ability to serve the public interest, while the primary mission of internal audit is to strengthen governance, risk management, and control processes. Effects extend beyond the organization. Audit contributes to an organization's overall stability and sustainability by providing assurance on its operational efficiency, reliability of reporting, compliance with laws and/or safeguarding of assets, and ethical culture. This, in turn, fosters public trust and confidence in the organization and the broader systems of which it is a part. BIA is committed to setting standards within the public and benefit the public. The National Internal Audit Standards Board is responsible for maintaining the standards in the interest of the public. This is achieved through an extensive, ongoing due process overseen by an independent body, the IPPFO. The process includes soliciting input from and considering the interests of various stakeholders, including internal audit practitioners, experts, government bodies, regulatory agencies, public representatives, and others, so that the standards reflect the diverse needs and priorities of society. And the standards, the global internal audit standards set forth principles, requirements, consideration, and examples for the professional practice of auditing globally. Standards apply to any individual or function that provides internal audit services, whether an organization internal auditor directly contracts with an external service provider or both. Organizations receiving internal audit vary in sector and industry affiliation, purpose, size, capacity, and structure.
The standards apply to the internal audit function and individual, including the chief audit executive. The chief audit executive is accountable for the internal audit function's implementation and conformance with all principles and standards. All internal auditors are responsible for the principles and standards to perform their jobs, which are presented primarily in Domain 2, Ethics and Professionalism, and 5, Performing Internal Services. Standards are organized into 5 domains. Domain I, Purpose of Internal Domain 2, ethics and professionalism. Domain 3, governing the internship. Domain 4, managing the internal audit function. Domain B, performing internal audit services. Domains of the group contain the following elements: principles, broad descriptions for the group of requirements and considerations, which include requirements, mandatory practice for internal auditing, considerations for implementation, common and preferred practices to consider when implementing the requirements. Examples of evidence of conformance which demonstrate that the requirements of the standards have been implemented. The standards use the word must in the requirement sections. Should be made to specify common and preferred practices for implementation sections. Each standard ends with examples of evidence. The examples are neither requirements nor the only ways to demonstrate conformance. Rather, they are provided to help internal audit functions quality assessments, which rely on demonstrative evidence, demonstrates with the standards. The requirements considered for implementation and examples of evidence of conformance are designed to help internal auditors with the standards. While conformance with the requirements is expected, internal auditors occasionally may be unable to conform with the requirements, still achieve the intent of the standard. Circumstances necessitate adjustments, often related to limitations or specific aspects of a industry and or jurisdiction. In these circumstances, alternative actions should be implemented to attend to the related standard. The chief audit executive responsible for documenting and conveying the rash of deviation in the adopted alternative actually appropriate parties. Related requirement and information appear in standard for point 1 conformance with global internal audit standards. In Domain 3, governing the internal audit function together with its principles and standards. While the circumstances necessitating adjustments are to the following section acknowledges the areas that consistently draw questions. Small internal audit functions and those in the public sector.
And small internal audit functions. The internal audit function's ability to fully conform may be affected by its size or of the organization. With limited resources, completing certain tasks may be challenging. Additionally, if the internal audit function comprises only one member, an adequate quality assurance improvement program will require assistance outside the internal audit function application in the public sector. While the global audit standards apply to all internal auditors in the public sector work in a government and governance, organizational, and funding structures that may differ from those of sector. The nature of these structures and related conditions may jurisdiction and level of government in which the internal audit function operates. Additionally, the used in the public sector differs from that of the sector. These differences may affect how internal audit functions in the public sector apply standards. The section applying global internal audits in the public sector, which follows Domain B, performing internal audit services, describes strategies for conformance amid the circumstances and conditions unique to internal auditing in the public.
Domain 9. Purpose of internal auditing. The purpose statement is intended to assist internal auditors and audit stakeholders in understanding and articulating the value of internal auditing. Internal auditing strengthens the organization's to create, protect, and sustain value, getting the board management with independent-based and objective assurance, insight, and foresight. Internal auditing enhances the successful achievement of its objectives, risk management, and control processes, decision-making, reputation, and credibility with its stakeholders. Ability to serve interest. Internal auditing is most effective when it is performed by competent professionals in control internal audit standards, which are in the public interest. The internal audit function is independently positioned with direct accountability to the board. Internal auditors are free from undue influence and committed to making objective assessments. Domain 2. Ethics and professionalism. The principles and standard ethics and profession domain of the global internal audit standards replace the IAS former code of ethics and outline the behavioral expectations for professional internal audit, including chief audit executives, other individuals, and any entities that provide internal audit services. Conforming these principles and standards instill trust in the profession of internal auditing, creates an ethical culture within the internal audit function, and provides the basis for reliance on internal auditors' work. All internal auditors are required to conform with the standards of ethics and professionalism. If internal auditors are expected to abide by other codes of ethics, behavior, or conduct, such as the organization, conformance with principles and standards of ethics and professionalism contained herein is still expected. That a particular behavior is not mentioned in these principles and standards is not precluded from being considered unethical or discreditable. Internal auditors are responsible for their own conformance. The chief audit executive is expected to support performance with the principles and standards in the ethics and professional domain by providing opportunities for training and guidance. Chief audit executive may choose to delegate certain responsibilities but retains accountability for the ethics and professionalism of the internal audit function.
Integrity. Internal audit demonstrate integrity in their work and behavior. Integrity is behavior characterized by adherence to moral principles, include demonstrating honesty and the courage to act based on the facts, even when facing pressure to do otherwise, or when doing so create potential adverse personal or organizational consequences. In simple terms, internal auditors are expected to tell the truth and do the right thing, even when it is uncomfortable or difficult. Integrity is the foundation of the other principles of ethics and professionalism, including objectivity, professional care, and confidentiality. The integrity of internal auditors is essential to establishing trust and earning respect. Principle to maintain activity in internal auditors maintain an impartial and unbiased attitude when performing internal audit services and making decisions. Objectivity is an unbiased attitude that allows internal auditors to make judgments, fulfill their responsibilities, and achieve the purpose of internal auditing without compromise. Positioned internal audit function supports Principle 3. Ability to make auditors apply the knowledge, skills, abilities to fulfill their roles and responsibilities successfully, demonstrating competency required helping and applying the knowledge, skills, and abilities to provide internal audit services. Because internal auditors provide services, the competencies needed by each internal auditor vary. In addition to possessing or obtaining the competencies or services, internal auditors improveness and quality of services by pursuing professional development. Principle for exercise. Do professional auditors apply professional care and planning and performing internal audit services? The standards that embody exercising due professional care require conformance with global internal audit standards, considering the nature, circumstances of the work to be performed. Application of professional skepticism to critically assess and evaluate information. Do professional care requires planning and performing internal audits with the diligence, judgment, and skepticism possessed by prudent and competent internal auditors. Professional care. Internal auditors perform in the interest of those receiving services but are not expected to be infallible.
Principle 5. Maintain confidentiality. Internal auditors use and protect information appropriately. Because internal auditors have unrestricted access to data, records, and other information necessary to fulfill the internal audit mandate, they often receive information that is confidential, proprietary, and or personally identifiable. This includes information in physical and digital form, as well as information derived from oral communication, such as formal or informal meeting discussions. Internal auditors must respect the value and ownership of information they receive by using it only for professional purposes and protecting it from unauthorized access or disclosure, internally and externally. Domain 3. Governing the internal audit function. Appropriate governance is essential to enable the internal audit function to be effective. It outlines the requirements for chief audit executives to work closely with the board to establish the internal audit function, position it independent, and oversee its performance. This domain also outlines management's responsibilities that support the board's responsibility for strong governance of the internal audit. While chief audit executive is responsible for the requirements in this domain, activities of the board and senior management are essential to the internal audit function's ability to fulfill the internal auditing. These activities are identified as essential conditions in each standard and establish a necessary foundation for an effective dialogue between the board, senior management, and the chief audit executive, ultimately leading an effective internal audit function. Principle 6. Authorized by the board. The board establishes, approves, and supports the mandate of the internal audit function. The internal audit function receives its mandate from the board or applicable law in certain public sector environments. The mandate specifies the authority, role, and responsibility of the internal audit function and is documented in the internal audit charter. The mandate empowers the internal audit function to provide the board and senior management with objective assurance, advice, insight, and foresight. The internal audit function carries a mandate by bringing a systematic, disciplined approach to evaluating and improving the effectiveness of governance, risk management, and control processes throughout the organization. Principle 7, positioned independently. The board establishes, protects the function's independence and qualifications. The board is responsible for enabling the independence of the function. Independence is defined as the freedom from conditions that impair the internal audit function's ability to carry out responsibilities.
The internal audit function is only able to fulfill the purpose of internal auditing when the audit executive reports directly to the board, is qualified, and is positioned at a level within the organization that enables the internal audit function to and responsibilities without interference. Overseen by the board oversees the internal audit function to ensure actions effectiveness. Board oversight is essential to enable the overall effectiveness of the audit function. Achieving this goal requires collaborative and interactive communication between the board and the chief audit executive as the board support in ensuring the internal audit function obtains sufficient resources to fulfill the internal audit mandate. Additionally, the board receives assurance about the quality of the performance of the chief audit executive and the internal audit quality assessment and improvement program, aiding the board's direct review of the results quality assessment. Principle 9, plan quickly. The chief audit executive plans to position the internal function to fulfill its mandate and achieve long-term success. Planning strictly requires the chief audit executive to audit mandate and the organization's governance, risk management, and control processes. Internal audit function develops and implements a strategy to support the organization's success. In addition, the chief audit executive creates and implements methodologies internal audit function and develop internal audit plan. People can manage resources. The chief audit executive manages resources to implement the internal audit function strategy and achieve its plan and mandate. Managing resources requires obtaining and deploying financial resources effectively. The chief audit executive needs to resource required to perform internal audit responsibilities and deploy the resources according to the methodologies established for the internal audit function. Principle 11. Effectively, the chief audit executive the internal audit function to communicatively with its stakeholders. Communication requires building relationships, establishing trust, and enabling stakeholders benefit from results of internal audit services. The Chief Audit Executive is responsible for helping the internal audit function establish ongoing communication with stakeholders to build trust and foster relationships. Additionally, the Chief Audit Executive oversees the internal audit function's formal communications with the board and enable quality and provide insights based on the results of internal audit services.
Principle to enhance quality. The Chief Auditor is responsible for the internal audit conformance with the global internal audit standards and continuous improvement. Quality is a combined measure of conformance with the global internal audit standards and of the audit functions performance. A quality assurance and improvement program is designed to evaluate and promote the internal audit functions conformance with achievement of performance objectives and pursuit of continuous improvement. The program includes internal and external assessments. The Chief Audit Executive is responsible for ensuring that the internal audit function is continuously seeking improvement. This requires developing measures to assess the performance of internal audit engagements, internal auditors, and the internal audit function. These objectives include continuous improvement. Principle 13: Plan engagements effectively. Internal auditors plan each engagement using a systematic, disciplined approach. The global internal audit standards, along with the methodologies established, the Chief Audit Executive form the foundation of internal auditors' systematic, disciplined approach planning engagements. Internal auditors are responsible for effectively communicating all stages of the engagement. Engagement planning starts with understanding the initial expectations for the engagement and the reason the engagement was included in the internal audit plan. When planning engagements, internal auditors gather the information that enables them to understand the organization and the activity under review and with the risks relevant to the activity. Engagement risk assessment allows internal auditors to identify and prioritize the risks to determine engagement objective and scope. Internal auditors also identify the criteria, resources needed to perform the engagement and develop an engagement work program, which describes the specific engagement steps to be performed. Principle 14: Conduct. Auditors implement the engagement program to achieve the engagement objectives. To implement the engagement work program, internal auditors gather information, analyze, and evaluate to produce evidence. These steps enable internal auditors to provide assurance and identify potential findings, determine the causes, effects, and significance of findings, develop recommendations, and or collaborate with management to develop conclusions. Principle 15: Communicate engagement results and plans. Internal auditors communicate the engagement results to the appropriate and management progress or the implementation of recommendations or action plans.